Hi, in this video you will learn how to choose a good laptop for programming. You can find these tips even helpful if the laptop which you're having is good enough for you to do the programming. In case you don't have a laptop and you're planning to buy a new one, and then you can make use of these tips to choose the right one. So let's get started. I have met few people and these are the list of steps which I have suggested them in every time they come up with this question. The approach I recommend for the beginners to check while buying a good laptop is looking at the system requirement for the product which they are going to use. Say for example, for this tutorial we will take three softwares: Visual Studio Code, PyCharm, Visual Studio 2019. These are the three different types of products, and I have taken these examples because each are having a different system spec compared to the other. Visual Studio Code is lightweight, so the spec is minimal. PyCharm is like intermediate application, and Visual Studio 2019 is a heavyweight application where the spec should be good enough. So what we will use is, we will use these system specification of these softwares to come up with the requirement which you can use as a guide for buying your laptop. So first I am checking for the Visual Studio Code system requirements, and you go to the first page, and then you can see that you require, these are the minimum spec: 100 GB 100 MB disk, and then 200 MB, and 1.0 GB of RAM, 1.6 GB of processor, and it supports almost all OS, Mac, Windows, Linux. So let's just copy this part, Visual Studio, and say processor, RAM, and Windows. So let's get rid of all these other details. Okay, now we have a spec for Visual Studio Code. Let's check for the PyCharm. So I got PyCharm system requirements. Go to the first link, and I am looking for the spec for this software. Okay, it's mentioned over here. Okay, so these are the system spec for PyCharm. 64-bit version, then minimum 4 GB RAM, recommended is 8 GB, 1.5 GB of hard disk, and this is about the display. Let's copy this. Okay, so finally Visual Studio 2019. So let me go for Visual Studio 2019 system requirements. First link. So if you scroll down, you can see the spec which is required for a laptop to run 2019. As you can see, it supports most of the Windows OS 10, 8.1, 7 server. So in our case, we are interested with Windows 10. So we'll choose with Windows 10. And this is about the hardware. Quad core or better. Then 8 GB minimum RAM. Hard disk is minimum 800 and recommended is 210. And if you see the final point, which is a key point, they suggest SSD. So this makes it clear that if you are going to use Visual Studio 2019, it's better you get a laptop with SSD, not hard disk drive. So now we have compiled the list of the system spec for all these three different products. Now it's up to you to choose which is important for you. Say for example, if you are into Python programming and you want to use only Python related product, then you can just target this PyCharm system requirements and choose a laptop based on it. As you can see here, they don't recommend specifically about SSD. So you have a leeway whether you can choose hard disk or you can choose SSD. Suppose if you want to target all these three applications, so that you want to be on a safer side and you want the laptop to be future proof, so that you want to use it for the next 2 or 3 years, just for example, then you can pick the most hardest part, means the one which is going to take more system bandwidth, and then you can base your laptop decision on that. So let me take Visual Studio 2019 as the base. Then my requirement is something like this. So I will, to arrive at my system requirements, I will say 1.8 gigahertz processor, minimum quad core, and then they recommend that 2 GB and 8 GB of recommended. I personally recommend to go with a bit better spec than what is given as the minimum, because minimum is given by these companies so that their product runs at normal conditions. But typically when you start programming, you have many other softwares installed your machine. So I recommend that you always go one level above the minimum requirement given by them. So although they mentioned as 8 GB of RAM recommended, I personally will go with say 16 GB. Regarding hard disk space, they want say 210 GB, and as I told before, they want like improved performance, they recommend on SSD, and they want minimum 210 GB. So what I will do is I will mention 256 GB SSD. You should have at least a quad core with 1.8 GHz processor, 16 GB RAM and 256 GB SSD. Of course, if according to your budget, if you are able to get a better spec than this, then it's always better. Say if you can get 512 GB SSD and even better RAM than this, it's always good. But we arrive at this with a clear spec which is based on the product which you are going to use. Now you can use this information and you can remove the subjectivity which is in your mind. Now you can go back to your website, favorite websites like Amazon or whichever is your online or offline stores, and then you can choose a laptop which has the spec which is minimum the one you had chosen. And I can assure you that you won't regret if you buy a laptop based on this configuration. Finally, I would like to mention about the brand. I have seen that many people have said liking for certain specific brand. Of course, even I like say Dell, HP as the brands. So in case you have any preference, then you can choose it. Personally, I will recommend say Dell, Lenovo, HP. So these are quite standard companies, and the product offerings from them should be having a good warranty, as well as the build quality should be good enough for doing the initial programming. If you had followed the set of instructions or tips I had given in this video, then I am sure that you will come up with a good system requirement for the laptop which you need to buy. You don't need to think too much about which laptop to buy, or you can ask your friends or your colleagues. This makes set of guidelines, makes it very clear for you to choose which laptop to get. I hope this video was useful for you in choosing the laptop of your choice. Good luck.